screen starts glowing, and the film starts rolling. You wanna be knowing what you might be in for. So give the show a listen and find out what you're missing. Put yourself in position for the is a good score.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to The Goods, a film podcast. This is Brian. Dan, you out there?
Come in and know me better, man. I'm here, Brian.
It's December when we're recording, most likely when you're listening. And so we have got a holiday slate of media to talk about this episode. Longtime listeners will know that this is the time of year we cover adaptations of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. And we've been at it for a while.
That's right. It's probably our earliest and longest running tradition at this point. I don't even know what the other candidates would be. Do we have other I guess April Fool's Day is another one.
Yep.
Spooky season, theme months. But this is the first one we did.
That's right.
That has stuck around at least.
So this is the fifth Christmas season, the fifth time that we are considering this story. And, you know, once it becomes a tradition, it's like you're almost obligated. You can't stop. So, Dan, are you feeling the years at this point?
Time is a flat circle, Brian. I can't believe that it's been, I guess that makes it 4 years since the first one, fifth one, meaning 4 years from the first. We've been doing the podcast now for a while. We're coming up on 200. And yeah, I think there is risk of this becoming rote and a chore. I don't feel that way yet. I think part of that has to do with the nature of this week's selections, which we'll talk about, of course. But I don't know. I'd like to see us push ourselves. Maybe find a new in every year into the story.
Right. Gotta always make it accessible in some new way. Gotta keep it fresh. Can't get stagnant. But it had me thinking about a song by Tom Lehrer, which I looked it up. Actually, the title of the song is A Christmas Carol. But it's like a satirical song about how Christmas is too commercial these days. It was written back in 1959. So people have been feeling that way for a while. But it opens, Christmas time is here, by golly, disapproval would be folly. Deck the halls with hunks of holly, fill the cup and don't say when. Kill the turkeys, ducks, and chickens, mix the punch, drag out the Dickens. Even though the prospect sickens, brother, here we go again.
So is that the guy who did the 12 Gifts of Christmas song?
No, that's Stan Freberg.
Okay.
Camp Granada.
Wait, no, that was Alan Sherman, wasn't it?
I
have it as Alan Sherman topic on YouTube.
Okay, so Alan Sherman did the 12 Days of Christmas song you're referring to, did Camp Granada, so it is the same person. Stan Freberg is just another person who sang a novelty Christmas song. And so his name is also on the album that I have Alan Sherman's 12 Days of Christmas on.
So there was a connection there.
Yes.
Gotcha.
That same album also has this Tom Lehrer song on it. I think it's Dr. Demento's Christmas album.
You know, I might have actually had that when I was a kid. That might have been the only Dr. Demento thing that I had. I'm going to look it up now, see if I recognize any of the other tracks.
It's got like a Cheech and Chong track. It's got a few different things. I think it has Christmas at Ground Zero from Weird Al.
All right, I looked up the cover. The cover is looking familiar. Oh, Nuttin' for Christmas. That was Stan Freberg, okay. The Chipmunks, that's right. All I want for Christmas is my 2 front teeth. So the 12 Gifts of Christmas, we mentioned it. I know you and I both like this. This is the one where it's to the tune of the 12 Days of Christmas, but then it ends with, like, each day is a bad gift that you would get. And then on the 12th day, he says, on the 12th day of Christmas, I'm going to exchange, and then counts down the remaining other ones. And the one that you hear over and over again is and a Japanese transistor radio. But I like his approach to the fact that the song just goes on and on and on. Like if you sing it not at a fast tempo, it's like a 5+ minute song, and if people are tired, like, okay, I got it. Like we don't need to hear what the gift number 7 was again. But he just says, and all that other stuff in the middle of it. And then he stops even saying all that other stuff and just jumps straight back down to Japanese transistor radio. And so the whole song is probably, I don't even know what it is, like 3 minutes or something like that. Because he just trims out the fat of 12 Days of Christmas. I think he's doing good work there. Another example of 12 Days of Christmas, it's very possible I've mentioned this on the pod before, but one of my favorite bands, Reliant K, they're kind of in the pop punk subgenre, and they did a Christmas album that's quite good, but their version of 12 Days of Christmas, they do it a really up-tempo, really fast tempo. And so not only do they all do all 12 Days of Christmas, but without making it feel too long, but they actually throw in a bridge too. So they're like adding on to the additional 12 Days of Christmas and still making it feel kind of fast, which I always admired.
Then there's the version in Pee-wee's Christmas Special where the woman is singing it to him over the phone and he ducks out of the phone booth. And then throughout the episode, it keeps cutting back to the phone booth and she's on like the 500th day.
That's right. All right, so I still have up the track list of this Dr. Demento Novelty Christmas Songs album. Definitely had this because I know all of these songs. So we also have Grandma Got Run Over by a Reindeer, a tacky classic. We have the Christmas Dragnet, which I didn't really know what Dragnet was when I first heard this as a kid. I was like, what am I listening to? But I probably should revisit that because I still kind of remember that even more than I like know actual Dragnet. I listen, this CD must have just been played in my house a bunch. And then the other one that caught my eye here is the I'm a Christmas Tree song. The only thing I remember about that is like in the middle of it, he says, I'm a Hanukkah bush. It's like an alternate to being a Christmas tree by Wildman Fisher with duet with Dr. Demento. And I remember one time I sang that song and my mom got mad at me because she thought I was making fun of Jewish people when I sang that part of it. Have I brought us too far astray already, Brian?
No, this is good. We're trying to find the spirit, find the energy, embrace the Yuletide. So it's good. And I listened to this CD many times as well. I remember in that Hanukkah Bush song, they're like, Santa Claus, he breaks lots of laws. He breaks and he enters. He travels all around the world without a valid passport. It's very freeform, lots of different, like, styles. Some you couldn't even call songs, like that Dragnet thing. It's more like a skit.
Right.
But we do have business at hand. So the theme, if you'll remember, listeners, every time we've done this with Christmas Carol takeoffs, we always have some kind of connecting thread, something that sets these selections in their own little subgroup, at least by our determination. The first year, it was all musicals. The second, I was going for non-musicals, although Rich Little's Christmas Carol had some songs. Also was just really strange. The third outing, we did standalone specials that featured established characters. So like Mickey's Christmas Carol and Bah Humduck, a Looney Tunes Christmas Carol. By the way, Dan, I was going through my various internet resource lists, and it turns out there was an earlier one called Bugs Bunny's Christmas Carol. So there's a different Looney Tunes out there.
You know, I just saw that. A critic I follow, Tim Brayton, he's watching every single one of the Looney Tunes. I think he's doing one a day, so it's going to take him about 3 years. Did you know that canonically, there's exactly 1,000 Looney Tune cartoons, Brian?
I did not know that.
If my understanding is correct, that is the number. But it had me looking up Looney Tune stuff, and I did stumble on. Oh wait, there's a past Bugs Bunny Christmas Carol, because I think that was like we had said at some point, like it was surprising that there had never been one, or like it's interesting that Looney Tunes finally did a Christmas Carol, but we were flat out wrong about that.
Right. There's always more to learn about this cache of literary tributes. Then last year, we watched versions of the story that had more modern settings. So we watched one where it was the 60s. We watched one where it was 2022, Spirited with Will Ferrell and Ryan Reynolds.
Was that also It's Christmas, Carol?
Yes.
With like Carrie Fisher? Is that who it was?
That's right, as all the ghosts. This year, my gimmick was it has to be an episode within the overall corpus of a TV show. So it's not like set apart as its own thing. You could argue, oh, this is the same thing you did year before last. I think it's a little different.
It is, yeah. Because like this is the blank episode where they did a Christmas Carol, as opposed to these are characters from blank doing a Christmas Carol.
Good. I'm glad we're on the same wavelength. 3 of these are half an hour, so very svelte, very streamlined. One of them is an hour.
Yeah, when you say half an hour and an hour, that's a TV half hour an hour. So that's, and when I say TV, I mean network TV. So we're talking 22 minutes or 44 minutes.
Right, so it didn't take too long. We watched all of these in about the length of time that it would take to watch a typical feature.
Mm-hmm.
And so, Dan, I want to ask, did you watch just these 4, or did you track down anything else this week?
No, I just watched these 4.
Okay.
What about you, Brian? It sounds like maybe you watched something else.
I watched 2 others. Well, first, let me say what we're officially focusing on, because I don't want to, undercut that. The 4 TV episodes I selected were from The Jetsons in 1985. We have A Jetson Christmas Carol. From The Real Ghostbusters in 1986, Xmas Marks the Spot. From Xena Warrior Princess in 1996, A Solstice Carol. And then, this isn't chronological, but I wanted to round out our discussion with, from Roseanne, the episode Halloween 4 in 1992. Did you find all of these, Dan?
I did find all of them, and you'll notice, I mean, we'll get to it, the last one is literally called Halloween, so we're dealing with something a little out of the ordinary there, but these are all weird in their own way, and yeah, I'm excited to talk about these. Circling back before we dive into the various themes that we've done, I would say one thing, if we were to go back in history and do it again, I would do year 2 before we did year 1, because I feel like year 2, where we did the core dramatic adaptations, really grounded me in the story in a way that I now even appreciate the musicals that we talked about in year 1 even more, That
would have been a good way. If on day 1 I knew we'd be doing this for 5 years, I probably would have structured it that way.
That's all right, though. I feel like, it's, you're kind of building a constellation of Christmas Carol viewpoints. And this new episode is kind of the weird purple star off in the corner, I think.
Yeah, it's like we're out beyond the Kuiper Belt here.
Yeah.
So I was thinking of Danny DeVito in It's Always Sunny, has a line where he says, I don't know how many years on this earth I got left, so I'm gonna get real weird with it. And that was my feeling this week. Oh, the other 2 that I watched were from Pepper Ann, A Valentine's Day Tune, and from Arthur, Prunella Gets It Twice, where in those, one is a Valentine's Day episode and one is a birthday episode.
Oh, a birthday carol?
Yeah.
Wild.
So I considered making those official entries, but I didn't want it to be all cartoons. I wanted to have a mix. So I didn't officially require those. I'm not going to linger on them, but I did watch them. But let's talk about these 4. I know Dan has his ways of tracking down movies. I had to get his help finding Roseanne, but the other 3 were scattered across streaming services. I watched Jetsons on Disney Plus, which, they devoured Hulu, and made that part of their empire. I watched Xena on Prime Video. And the other one, Ghostbusters, that was just up on YouTube.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I found them all streaming on gray area, probably not even gray area websites.
Well, sometimes that's necessary. They make some things just hard to find.
Yeah. And I was trying to think if any of these were likely to have been content modified, because the ones that I watched were like DVD rips, And I decided probably not. But, you're the first one to complain when they do stuff like that. So I figured I'd hit the DVD rip where I could.
Well, I'm glad that you put in that extra layer of scrutiny. I don't want to miss out on anything. That it could be a Mask 2 situation and we miss out on the green sperm.
I can't even imagine the amount of richness our life would have lost.
All right, let's dive in. We got a lot of movies to talk through, except they were all short, but there are 4 of them. And they're not movies, really. They were TV episodes. We can't log these on Letterboxd, Dan, except right now this first one is up.
Believe me, I search. I don't want any movie watching I do to not give me some sort of like statistical credit that I can look back and point at,
Everything must be gamified. If I find myself doing something that doesn't accrue points, I need to stop doing that and start doing something where I earn achievements.
How can I see my little bar go up? I think I'm just watching these things for my own elucidation and entertainment. Come on, people.
But a Jetson Christmas Carol you can log from 1985 for some reason, even though it's just a regular episode of the show. This one caught my eye. Full disclosure, I just Googled TV episodes that use A Christmas Carol, and I found a listicle, and I grabbed things from, like, top 20 Christmas Carol episodes.
So is a listicle just a list? I hear people only say listicle now. Like, I wrote something that was a list, and each section was like a little mini essay. So someone's like, hey, a nice listicle. But I don't think of that term. Like, when I hear that term, I think of, like, I don't know. I feel like people use that term pejoratively, like when they're talking about BuzzFeed, like diminishing content into something that can be consumed in bullet points. But, like, does that just mean a list that's also an article?
I believe so. An article that's a list. Like, if you're looking at a list on Wikipedia, I think you can call that just a list. But if it's top 10 anything, top 20 anything that's an article that probably has ads down the sidebar, and at this point, like, in between every 2 points, like, you open it on your phone and you can't even scroll all the way to the bottom because all the ads just crash the app. That's a listicle.
But there's like a middle ground in between those. Like, when we were doing our articles on earnthis.net, our old blog, and we would say, oh, top whatever, your advertising jingle one, for example. Top 15, I think it was, advertising jingles. Is that a listicle, even though that presumably doesn't make your phone and ad blocker overheat when you pull it up?
I think you just have to make peace with the fact that you write listicles, Dan.
I guess.
You can ennoble the art form, but you got to call it what it is. So the Jetsons, I felt like we had to watch this one because we covered previously the Flintstones. We watched a Flintstones Christmas Carol from 1994. This one predates it. It's from 1985. But, Jetsons and Flintstones, they're kind of twin series. Flintstones, it was 1960s sitcom tropes transposed onto a cartoon Stone Age setting. Jetsons, it's 100 years in the future. So it's supposed to be 2062, I guess, when the show begins. I saw back in 2022 some articles, possibly listicles, talking about that George Jetson was born in 2022. Because he's 40 years old in 2062.
Okay. So he's what, Gen Alpha then?
I guess so. What did you know about the Jetsons, Dan? What's your past exposure to the Jetsons?
So I watched a decent amount of Cartoon Network as a kid, so I kind of saw all the old Hanna-Barbera stuff a lot, and that includes the Jetsons. I probably saw it like through elementary school, probably not much in middle school or beyond that. It was watching TV less and watching different stuff. So I kind of remembered, well, of course, the very catchy theme song. I still know all the words. But just kind of the look and a few of the specific images. This is, I was like deeply engaged with this episode of TV as I was watching it.
You were locked in. Your neurons were activated.
And not just because of the Christmas Carol, but I was like, this is just fascinating, like retro futuristic look. And it's also just a corny sitcom too. And on top of all that, it's like a sitcom not for kids. It's not like mature or anything like that, but like the jokes are like just things that kids wouldn't get. Like, boy, Christmas is sure expensive type jokes, you know?
Right, like the Flintstones, it was aired in prime time.
Mm-hmm.
And is essentially like a reskinned adult sitcom of the time. People say that the Flintstones in particular was basically a remake of the Honeymooners with Jackie Gleason, except they're cavemen. And the Jetsons production history is pretty interesting. I didn't know this really before this week. But, so this episode, remember I've been calling it a 60s sitcom. This episode is from 1985. But it's still the same show. The way it was aired and produced is strange. So, between like September 1962 and March 1963, they made 24 episodes, an original run in prime time, like one season. And it was moderately successful. Not as successful as the Flintstones. But then they started re-airing them on Saturday mornings, and it got popular. People were clamoring for Jetsons. People were into the Jetsons. And so I don't know why it took quite this long, but then in 1985, they rebooted the Jetsons, bringing back the original cast, and they made 51 more episodes until 1987. And the way the episodes are listed and the way that you'll find them in the app is as though the show just continued, as though there was no gap.
Interesting.
It's like, okay, well, here's season 2 and 3, and it's, you know, it's 22 years later.
That's pretty wild. So this is like a revival. It's like a, what do they call those now? Legacy sequels? Legacy reboots? Something like that?
Yeah, so I guess this is not a brand new thing to be doing that.
I didn't know that. So this really isn't 60s. This is like 80s pretending to be the 60s.
That's correct. And then everything was brought to a culmination with the theatrical release of Jetsons the movie in 1990. And pretty darkly, more than half of the OG cast died while they were making Jetsons the movie.
Oh my gosh, really?
Like George O'Hanlon, Dawes Butler, and I think Don Messick all died while they were making the movie. So some recorded all their lines, some recorded like half their lines.
There was a lot about this that is just so weird for me. You have, I don't even know what's weirdest. The design of everything. It's like, I don't even know if it's like Disney World of Tomorrow or something like that. Like what would you call this look?
Yeah, it's actually, that's perfect. I'm glad that you queued me up for this, Dan. It is the Tomorrowland aesthetic from Disneyland. And what this specific architectural style is called is Googie.
Googie?
Googie. And it refers to like signs with weird angles and little like spires coming off the angles with like balls at the end.
Interesting.
So if you look at the like Welcome to Las Vegas sign, that's a Googie sign. And Jetsons very much delves into the retrofuturism and Googie.
The Googie, yeah. Okay. Going big on the Googie.
And kind of the, like, satirical punchline of the Jetsons is that everything is automated. So it's the future, as envisioned in 1962, and, like, this workaday husband, George Jetson, goes to work, but, like, all his work is done by computers. It just completes itself around him. So really there is no reason for him to go to work, but he's still acting like the stereotypical working stiff.
Yeah. I noticed that. I was like, what is his job? Like, I know the company he works for, Spacely Sprockets, they make sprockets, but, like, we don't know what a sprocket is. That's just, like, a word that means a gizmo, you know?
Right. Although in this specific episode is very sprocket central, and you see the sprocket. So sprockets are like gears.
Right. Yeah. Gotcha. That makes sense. Because does end up being kind of like the thrust of part of the conflict we'll see. There's some weird stuff here. So there's the maid robot. What's her, Rosie? Is that her name?
That's right.
Who's like coded as an old, like a classic maid type character from like Hollywood, which in turn means that she basically looks like and talks like a stereotypical black woman, like a kindly old woman.
Yeah, a mammy.
Yeah. And I was like, that's kind of strange. And then she drinks eggnog and gets like a zap look on her face. So I was like, okay, I guess she's drinking alcohol too. This robot here. And the dog talks like Scooby-Doo, Astro the dog. Ruh-roh.
Right, same voice actor, I believe.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, dogs, I guess, start every word with R. And the thing is, I thought I had not seen this, and then as soon as it started and I realized, oh, this is the episode where the dog gets sick because it eats a sprocket. This was buried in my memory from like when I was maybe 4 years old.
I don't remember anything from when I was 4 years old, let alone Jetsons episodes that I watched.
And so, like, multiple times, maybe the reason that I remember it is that my mom would bring up, oh, you were so creative as a kid. You had this imaginary dog friend, and one time you said he ate a sprocket and had to go to the hospital. So I did not make that up. That's from this. I took that.
There you go. It's something you stole.
Yeah, it was very influential because I thought we've talked before about stop, drop, and roll. You know, the media you consume, you start to expect, I will encounter this in my life. I thought something that you had to worry about if you like owned a dog was that the dog would eat a sprocket. And so I've always been kind of worried about that.
Interesting. That's like a normal vet procedure. That dog ate a sprocket. Get your rubber gloves on.
Yeah. And so that's what happens in this one. The Jetsons are getting ready for Christmas. George, I guess, has to work late because his boss, Mr. Spacely, is... What are all the descriptors of Scrooge? He's a covetous old sinner. He's...
miserly.
Sharp as a flint, solitary as an oyster. And so George has to stay at work. The family's at home wondering, oh, well, when will George come home? And in the midst of it, Astro, the Scooby-Doo dog, who is a robot or a cyborg, he tears open his present, which has a robot cat inside, and he tears the cat apart, and he eats a sprocket that is in the makeup of this robot cat, and he immediately gets really ill.
It turns green, like it's giving him a tummy ache, which I guess it would.
So, Dan, I want to talk about the ethics of this and the metaphysics of this, because, okay, so you're giving a robot to a robot. Can a robot own a robot?
Wait, is Astro a robot?
I'm 95% sure Astro is robotic.
Really? I didn't think he was a robot. Okay, we're gonna look this up.
Okay, let's see. No, maybe not. You could be right.
The family has a dog named Astro that talks with an initial consonant mutation in which every word begins with an R, as if speaking with a growl.
Okay, so it seems he is not a robot. So, all right, fair enough. Living beings can own robots at this point in the timeline. I concede that point. I think I confused him with Goddard, the robot dog on Jimmy Neutron.
Well, half of the things in this are robots, so I don't really blame you, but they're generally like designed to be very clearly robots, like the way that a 7-year-old kid would draw a robot, you know?
I see. He's gray, so that confused me. I thought he was made of metal, but that is not the case. Don't believe everything you hear on the radio, folks. So now, okay, that's
especially about the Jetsons, yeah.
Fair enough, but still, it struck me the brutality that he has ripped this robot apart. Like, would they act the same way if the dog ripped apart Rosie, I wonder?
Oh, wow.
Robots are just disposable here.
That's very interesting, and of course, that makes me think of Blade Runner, the fine line. At what point do we start treating a robot as if it is a human?
Right. It would have been more interesting if Astra was a robot. My argument falls apart a little bit, but still, it's like they have a robot who's kind of a member of the family. Meanwhile, at work, Spacely gets visited by ghosts, of course. Christmas Carol adaptations, that's what we're here to do. And they're going to try to, give him the Christmas spirit, the generosity, the gregariousness, all the usual stuff. Spacely is voiced by Mel Blanc. We were talking Looney Tunes.
Oh, he is? Oh. I knew I recognized the voice, but I just didn't place it as the voice. That was like half of all Looney Tunes, if not more.
The first ghost who shows up is his former business partner, supposedly, although we've never seen him before. His name is Marsley.
We talked about Jason X, the Friday the 13th, the 10th one, where they go to space. And I was remarking how it has corny space-themed dialogue where they'll just say a thing, but they'll say a space version of it. And that's the general joke of the Jetsons, that premise. So things being called Marsley instead of Marley is the punchline of a solid percentage of jokes on the Jetsons.
I loved Marsley. He's just Marley, but also an alien.
Yeah, he's a mummy too. Yeah, I guess he's got the wrapping around him. That doesn't Marley have something wrapped around his head sometimes?
Right. You may remember that when we talked the Flintstones Christmas Carol, I said that in the early stages they had been talking about making Fred's mean boss, Mr. Slate, the central character. And I said that the reason they probably didn't do that is how would you, decenter the protagonist and make it all about the boss for a whole, installment? But it turns out that it's because they already did that. Here in the Jetsons, they got Mr. Spacely central.
And by the way, kind of like the Looney Tunes ones we talked about a couple years ago, this takes half the episode to get with non-Christmas Carol stuff before we get to the Christmas Carol, which means we're all of 10 minutes in the actual Christmas Carol here.
Right, it's really, really fast. And the ghosts are all robots except for Marsley. And I couldn't really tell you what's different about them. They're like flying computer monitors and stuff.
They're very cool. It's like Christmas present is actually just a big present. Did you notice that one, Brian?
I didn't. So I'm going to have to go back to the tape. They might have a line that kind of says that he looks like a present.
Yeah.
It had a face, though, and presents usually don't.
Did it have a face? I thought it was just arms and it pulled him in. I could be wrong. I don't know. We watched so many of them.
No, wait, okay, now I gotta see a picture. You're probably right. Whenever we watch 4 things, it's after the third one, my brain turns off, and I start losing things.
It's threw it all in a blender, right? But I liked the Christmas Yet to Come because it captures, the distinct, intimidating shape.
Yes.
Of the Christmas Yet to Come that you think of, the Grim Reaper shape.
Right, so Future is like a monolith robot. It's kind of like from 2001: A Space Odyssey. It's tall, looming, tombstone type robot. And they're showing Spacely. So Past shows him scenes from his life. And I guess he's just always been the selfish miser, like cartoonishly money-loving. And so there's some jokes about that.
Yeah, and there's some good ones here. The one is that the bit where we would expect Belle, the Belle version, we see him meet his wife, and she's like, sometimes I think you love money even more than you love me. And he's like, well, yeah, of course I do. But I love you too, and we're going to have a lot of money. And she's like, okay. And they're still married. Like, yeah. I can't wait to talk about the punchline of this one, because this has got a terrific punchline.
Also, when he sees himself as a kid, he's like running a lemonade stand, and George Jetson as a child is still working for him. I guess George Jetson is just born to be the underling. And what that bit had me thinking of is this was in the wake of Muppet Babies, which burst onto the scene in Muppets Take Manhattan in 1984, and like immediately was a cartoon show. And then everybody was making like show spin-offs that were baby versions and child versions.
So this is like Jetson Babies here.
Right. The Flintstone Kids was on from 1986 to 87. The present robot shows Spacely that the Jetsons have this situation with Astro. So they're in the Cratchit role here. That it's this struggling family, and shouldn't you show them some mercy, some contrition? Can't you be a little more generous, Mr. Spacely? Future shows him that the Jetsons, I guess Astro died and they sued him and they took his whole business empire. Took him to the cleaners, so now they're rich and the financial situations are reversed.
This was so funny to me because it like completely flips upside down the whole Christmas Carol premise that it's humanist and like anti-wealth accumulation. Because the reason that he has his big act of generosity is like he doesn't want the Jetsons to sue him because of a faulty sprocket went flying into the dog's throat. And when he gets terrified of the future and he says, no, it's not that like he dies without any friends or anyone loving him. It's that he's poor and the Jetsons are rich and he doesn't have his money anymore. And that's the thing that causes his breaking point. He's like, I must find a way to prevent this. And I thought this was genius. But that kind of brings me to like an overarching theme of this year, Brian, which is like, have you ever seen the, I forget what they're called, like iceberg diagrams for like how if you're a hardcore fan of something, like at the very top is like the stuff that just the normies know. And then the further down you go, the more like weird and offbeat it is. It's like, we're kind of going deeper on the iceberg diagram for Christmas carols. Like I feel like this Christmas Carol, and to some extent all of the ones here, are better enjoyed if you already have seen like, 16 different Christmas carols, because it kind of inverts them and plays with them in weird ways. This is like advanced level Christmas caroling where we're like flipping the whole thing upside down, Graduate
level Christmas Carol. That's right. We talked last year to Ben Stanley, who we introduced as the man who has seen 100 Christmas carols. And I think mid-discussion, he clarified that it was like 120 at that point.
I think he said 130. Yeah, it's crazy.
And I wonder, Dan, if even he has seen all of these yet. He could probably still take us to task. He's probably still far outside our depth. But one wonders. These were some strange ones. And yeah, it's kind of like a eat the rich message. If you want to stay rich, it's like you gotta give a little, at least. You gotta trickle down a bit so that you don't have your whole system upended.
It's kind of the opposite of, of Scrooge.
Of what you usually hear. They just today, I guess, caught the guy who shot the healthcare CEO.
Yeah, I saw that. And he's like a computer scientist, which is my profession. I think he's actually a data engineer, which is a little different, but I work with data engineers. To my knowledge, none of them have killed a CEO.
A mathematician, a different kind of mathematician, and a statistician.
What is that from again?
The Simpsons. There's some group of experts that they're talking to, and that's how they introduce him. Yeah. So Scrooge Spacely is changed, and he shows up at the Jetsons' door with a private veterinarian. There was some back and forth. Oh, can we get a veterinarian? No, we can't because nobody works on Christmas. And I guess Spacely just has a private veterinarian at his disposal. You know, money greases the wheels. You can get somebody to make a house call.
This is funny. It's like the problem was solved because he's rich enough to have the resources to have his own version of something. And the way the vet resolves the issue is he just like, okay, open wide, and sticks his hand in and pulls the gear out of. Like, wouldn't that tear some esophageal tissue or something like that?
Man, so this is a tangent, but something I just learned about because my brother told me about it is really horrifying to me and kind of relevant to what you just said, is farmers have developed this technique that's called a cannilated cow. And it's where you take a cow and you insert a window on the side of the cow, and it allows you to more easily sample the contents of the cow's stomachs.
Oh, yeah. I've heard about this before. You probably don't want to get me started on food ethics, Brian. That's one area where I think we disagree.
That's probably true.
Philosophically.
But yeah, wild to me that this is a thing that can be done. I would just assume it would cause a terrible infection. But I guess it works. You just put a porthole on the side of your cow. And that's kind of the approach that the veterinarian takes here. Just reach on in.
Another thing is they factory farms started noticing higher infection rates across cattle population in their factory farms. And they're like, well, why? We've got it down to a science exactly how much you need to ward off the natural amount of this. And it turned out the reason was because cow parts were getting into the food that the other parts were eating. And so what they didn't account for in their models is that cows would be cannibalizing other cows and getting the germs from them. So they had to ramp up the antibiotics because the accidental runoff of cow parts into the cow food. They're like, oh, we didn't realize the cows were accidentally eating other cows. So now we had to ramp up the antibiotics. By the way, they don't give antibiotics to sick cows. They give antibiotics to all cows because they might get sick. So like, well, in the off chance that you get sick, you're just going to have your antibiotics so that you don't get sick. Lots of strange and horrifying practices out there if you start to dig into it.
I wonder, I don't know, I kind of want to see what's going on in myself. Like maybe I need a cannulation. If it's that easy.
Huh. Would I cannulate myself? Learn more about what's going on in there. What the food looks like when it gets there.
You could have your own little magic school bus experience.
Beep, beep.
Octopus in my neighborhood? Let's move on. We've just got through one of the four so far. The second thing we watched was from the series Real Ghostbusters from the 80s, called Xmas Marks the Spot. This show aired from 1986 to 1991, over the course of which there were 140 episodes. Of course, it follows up on the 1984 film Ghostbusters. But, Dan, have you ever watched this show before?
So, I recognize the theme song and the look of it and the characters. I definitely watched it at least a little bit when I was a kid, but this was not regular rotation viewing for me.
Yeah, this was a little before my time. I've mostly learned about it from associating with people who talk about old cartoons. But you might wonder, why is it called The Real Ghostbusters? Well, it's because Filmation was like this cheapo animation studio when the Ghostbusters movie came out and was a huge hit. Filmation snapped up the rights to an earlier show, a live-action sitcom from 1975 called The Ghost Space, like space on a keyboard, Busters. The Ghostbusters was this live-action show from 1975 about detectives who investigate ghosts. And one of them is a gorilla. Now, Filmation rushed out, first to print, a cartoon show based on The Ghost Space Busters from 1975. Which means that they were the first on the air. And then the people who had the rights to the mega hit movie, they had to set themselves apart. Say, wait a minute, no. You're called the Ghostbusters, but we're the Ghostbusters that people want to see. We're the real Ghostbusters. And so that's the explanation. As convoluted as it is.
When I was a kid, I just kind of assumed that every property had a cartoon version of it. Because there was like multiple that did. There was this. I'm trying to think what other examples there are.
Oh, it was off the charts, especially in our childhoods. It really blew up that everything gets a cartoon show. And even to the point that like R-rated movies inspired kids' cartoon shows. There was like Tales from the Crypt, The Toxic Avenger. There was the Brendan Fraser Mummy had a cartoon. Men in Black. The Matthew Broderick Godzilla got a show. Everybody was making shows.
Godzilla, that's the one I was thinking of, yeah. I watched a couple of Godzilla episodes too when I was a kid.
And it works well when it's a monster property. It's just like every week you get some kind of new monster that they fight. That's perfect structure, like Power Rangers structure. This one was the 13th episode of the show overall. It was kind of the finale of season 1. And the episode premise is that it starts with the Ghostbusters driving the Ecto-1, their kind of custom hearse car that they have in the movie, through a snowstorm. They say they're responding to some case in upstate New York. You know, they're from Manhattan. They're driving a little further afield, I guess, than they usually do. And they pass through a strange weather phenomenon. And they emerge on the other side in a town that they say looks like Victorian London.
By the way, the strange weather phenomenon is just a portal. It's like a very clearly a cartoon portal, but yeah.
Also, I guess Peter Venkman, the Bill Murray character from the movie, hates Christmas. I don't really know why, but I guess it's because we've talked Bill Murray before. You know, his characters are always like the asshole who's cool and funny because he's an asshole.
Yeah, we talked about a lot about that in the... Was it last year when we talked about Scrooge?
Right. Peter Venkman is voiced by not Bill Murray, but Lorenzo Music. So, Dan, did you recognize this voice?
I did not. Ought have I?
I think you ought. Lorenzo Music also voiced Garfield in the cartoons.
Oh, okay.
And so there is an interesting occurrence where Bill Murray was Peter Venkman in Ghostbusters, then Lorenzo Music in the Ghostbusters cartoon.
Oh my god, I know where this is going.
Lorenzo Music was Garfield in the cartoon, who was then later played by Bill Murray in the theatrical feature.
May the circle of infinity be unbroken. That's great. By the way, this is great because we have a stealth Scrooge. Well, sorry, I guess I'm jumping the gun here, but go ahead.
Yeah, so this is good. I think this one's going to get my highest rating of the bunch because the Ghostbusters, they get to this house in this old town block. They're like, oh, this is weird. Everything's like gaslight and, you know, there's no cars. But they go into this house. They're like, well, guess we're in the right spot. And they go upstairs and Scrooge is up there in his bedchamber being menaced by the Christmas ghosts. And the Ghostbusters are like, oh, perfect. We're in the right place because there's ghosts here. They open up their trap like it's any other work day, and they trap all the Christmas ghosts. And they're like, okay, here's your bill.
Job's done. This is so funny to me.
Episode over, 5 minutes in. A really good hook. because then Scrooge like stiffs them on the bill because he is a miser, but they're like, whatever. We're blue collar, we're working stiffs, another day, another dollar, and we'll take what we can get and fine, and we'll go home.
And it's also funny because he gives them just like a single silver coin, and it's very clearly meant to stiff them, and they look at it like, whoa, this is like an antique pure silver coin in mint condition. This is great. I thought that was funny too.
That's right. I'm glad that you're remembering the details because it really was a whirlwind for me. But yeah, he gives them this ostensibly old piece of currency. I think Egon is the one who points it out. He's the one who always says the nerdiest things. But they climb back in the car and they drive back through the portal and come back to a New York where it's like Hell Valley. The evil Hill Valley in Back to the Future 2. Everything has changed all of a sudden.
Well, what I think is even more relevant would be Pottersville from It's a Wonderful Life. Because it's not quite like If I Was Never Born, but it's like this expressionistic, anti-cheery town. But yeah, you're right. It's also Back to the Future because they went back and they accidentally modified the past. It's funny that like the thing that they modified was a fictional character's fate, but yeah.
Right, because if Scrooge was never redeemed, he never interacts with the ghosts, so he never had to change. He was just always mean. I guess he wrote an influential book praising selfishness and hating Christmas and misanthropy.
It's even better than that because it's called A Christmas Humbug instead of A Christmas Carol. So now when they go back to the present, it's not just that people don't like Christmas anymore, but instead of Christmas being the time of cheer, conviviality, humanism, embracing everyone around you, Christmas is now the season where you get especially grumpy. And instead of going around and saying Merry Christmas to each other, you say Bah, humbug to each other. And like when they try to be nice, people are like, why are you being nice on Christmas? Dude, it's a humbug Christmas. What are you talking about? And so it's like, this was just kind of a very goofy twist that now we have a special time of year where everybody's an asshole to each other.
I just like that, yeah, this caught on with everybody. Everybody's like, okay, this is what we're doing now. And so everybody in Manhattan is just nasty to each other on Christmas. The Ghostbusters are like, well, what the heck? They figure out pretty quickly what they did. Remember, everything's got to happen in like 21 and a half minutes. But they realize, oh, we actually went back in time. We disrupted the time stream, and we're responsible for this. And the way we got to fix it is we'll split up, and 3 of us will go back in time and talk to Scrooge while Egon goes into the containment unit, this place that, if you've seen the movie, the Ghostbusters have the trap where they take it out on their missions. It's like a tissue box, and it sucks up the ghosts of the day. Then they take it back to the fire station where they work at and like dump the ghosts into this larger thing that's like a gateway to a dimension of some kind where it contains the ghosts. So Egon's going to go in there and get the Christmas ghosts out because they have to do their Christmas business. But meanwhile, since they are incapacitated, the other 3 Ghostbusters, Ray and Peter and Winston, they are all going to go back and sub in for the Christmas ghosts. So they know the story. Now they've got to kind of go through the motions to make sure everything goes right. And kind of like Nightmare Before Christmas, they're not good at it.
Yeah. They kind of have it right, and Scrooge is like, oh, yeah, I guess I see what you're saying. But like, it doesn't have the sweeping emotional impact that seeing his childhood is supposed to have. And they're like using technology to try and convince him, which had me thinking of that famous quote. It's some sci-fi author, I think, said it. Do you know who said it, Brian? But it's any sufficiently advanced form of technology is indistinguishable from magic.
I have heard that. I don't know off the top of my head who it was.
Oh, you know who it is? It's the guy who did, what is it called? Is it Discworld?
Oh, Terry Pratchett?
I think it's Terry Pratchett, yeah. I could be wrong.
Yeah, they've got like flashlights to simulate their ghostly aura. Meanwhile, Egon is battling through the like ghost dimension, which is full of all the ghosts they've captured so far on the show. So like if you had watched it this far, you'd be like, oh, it's the ghost from the Halloween episode.
I was wondering, because I knew you saw a lot, so that was a fun little greatest hits section there.
Yeah.
Seeing those guys fly around.
And when I watched it on YouTube, one of the comments was that maybe they should have waited a little while to do this episode. Like, put it a little later in the show, and then it would have even more impact that he's encountering all the previous ghosts. While all this is happening, of course, Peter is also going through the Scrooge change. He's seeing the value of Christmas and becoming less of a curmudgeon.
Right. He's our stealth Scrooge.
Yeah.
I thought that was kind of funny.
Kind of like we had in Spirited, where it's like, well, I guess in that case it was like Will Ferrell was the mentor and he was guiding Ryan Reynolds, but really, underneath it all, it was Ryan Reynolds was guiding Will Ferrell.
Oh, I guess you're right. Yeah, it's the same idea, because it's like the ghost actually has to learn the meaning.
Yeah. But they're eventually able to, they people impersonating the ghosts struggle through long enough until Egon is able to get the real deal ghosts out of the trap. And like in Nightmare Before Christmas, the people who really have the holiday magic are able to make it back just in time to restore the timeline.
Right, this is Michael J. Fox playing Johnny B. Good on guitar, trying to do it in time so he doesn't vanish from the paradox he's created where he disappears.
And so Scrooge likes Christmas, Bill Murray, Lorenzo Music likes Christmas, and everybody goes home. And that's Xmas Marks the Spot.
2 for 2 on very strange Christmas Carol interpretations that in some ways take the basic assumptions of Christmas Carol and turn them on their head. And both in cartoons, which is, I don't know, like, it feels kind of sophisticated for what you would expect.
And like I said, we could have had the other two be Pepper Ann and Arthur, and it would have all been cartoons. But this next one on the list, I couldn't go without covering this next one. Because it's the Xena Christmas Carol. It's called A Solstice Carol from 1996. Dan, did you have previous exposure to Xena Warrior Princess?
I had none, actually. I had heard of it, of course, knew a little bit about its reputation and its kind of cult following, both in being like a long-running fantasy series with like a kind of playful tone, but still being a good fantasy series. But then obviously very famous because the two protagonists are women on a life journey together, and by the end of the show, more or less like explicitly married, basically.
Yeah, this is just like an early second season episode, and it was already like very gay.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I remember this show, which was actually a spin-off of a show called Hercules: The Legendary Journeys. That's the one with Kevin Sorbo. That show, Hercules, ran 1995 to 1999, 111 episodes. But even by the end of the first season, they'd already introduced Xena, and like immediately, it was a backdoor pilot because Xena had her own show almost straight away, and that ended up even more popular and successful and long running. Between 1995 and 2001, there were 134 Xena episodes.
Oh my gosh.
And like you said, it's a live-action, hour-long fantasy series, primarily inspired by Greek mythology, but if you're cranking out 134 episodes, you gotta look a little further afield, and basically anything mythological. Genies, the ancient Sumerians. It's like, bring in any mythology and it's fair game. Just any like mythical monster that we could have be a monster of the week, do it. Stylistically, it has a lot in common with other 90s TV dramas. I was thinking of like Star Trek TNG or X-Files or Dr. Quinn Medicine Woman or even like The West Wing. And it's hard to explain this, but they all had a certain way that they would like cut to commercial, where like the camera pushes in on somebody's face and there will be like a swell in the music as it fades out.
Yeah. Oh yeah, you definitely see this a lot. And I notice this if I ever watch old shows on TV too. And even if you watch, it was one of the DComs, I can't remember if it was Zombies or Teen Beach, but a couple of the ones that actually originated on Disney Channel, they have a similar effect where you can see where it cuts to commercial.
A recent show that copies this style is The Orville from Seth MacFarlane. He very much like made it seem as though it were actually just more episodes of Star Trek: The Next Generation, or whatever else came immediately after it, Deep Space Nine. And yes, like you said, these TV shows, they've got like same-sex life partners. It's kind of there in Hercules because he's going around with his nephew Iolaus, but then in this Xena, it's Xena played by Lucy Lawless and Gabrielle played by Renee O'Connor.
So I was reading a little bit about it, and apparently they weren't allowed to like explicitly acknowledge it, but like everyone from the cast and the crew knew that like that was the intent of the show, if not originally, before long, and like very much picked up on by queer audience, particularly the lesbian community. And what I read is that at the like near the end, it might have been in the finale or something, there was a thing where Renee O'Connor, the second character, had to revive Xena. And it was like this water transfusion, but it was like shot in a way that it just looks like a kiss or something like that. And that was their way of like acknowledging it while still getting around not being able to show them actually in love or something like that.
Oh, wow.
And there was talks of doing a reboot that would have had it openly acknowledged, but that fell through.
The tone of the show is like very silly. And so every episode, there's like kung fu style action, like Xena in a harness jumps into the air, kicks 5 guys in the face, then comes back down again. Crouching tiger, hidden dragon stuff.
And she says, "Ay, ay, 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 ay."
Her weapon of choice is called a chakram. It's a bladed frisbee, so you can throw it like Oddjob's hat.
Not the normal throwing device that I think of, but I get it. Yeah, like a round ninja throwing star mixed with a boomerang.
Yeah, I guess it does come back. It can basically do anything that's needed.
Yeah.
And in this episode, which again is titled A Solstice Carol, Xena and Gabrielle come to a city which is ruled by a tyrannical king who has outlawed celebration of the solstice. So, ostensibly, I guess we're in BC here. I guess eventually we're going to find... Well, we'll see what we find by the end of this episode.
Yeah, it builds. It builds.
But there's a lot going on here.
So just to kind of put you through my mindset here. So the Jetsons just got that unhinged, like, anti-Scrooge arc where he's like, he comes to further love his money, but gets around being sued so he can maintain his hoard of wealth. And then Ghostbusters, which is like recreating bits of A Christmas Carol, but with the Ghostbusters themselves having to like reenact the ghost because they accidentally busted the 3 spirits. So like some very unhinged energy. And so for the first half of this one, I was like, all right, this is just A Christmas Carol, but like old medieval times, and they're not saying the word Christmas, like to start. But it builds from there.
Yeah. Xena and Gabrielle come into this town. Christmas is not allowed, but they never say Christmas. It's always the solstice. But there's this gaggle of orphans who like celebrate hipster underground Christmas. They're like, they're in the alleys, they're in the back ways, and they've got secret solstice trees. And the orphans are cared for by this woman who is introduced as Milana, although I had subtitles on Amazon Prime and it spelled it Melania. And she's like, keeping their solstice celebration a secret and taking care of them in this orphanage that she's got. There's also a kindly toy maker in the town whose name is Centicles. But he's like too cowardly to give out the toys openly, celebrate solstice openly. He's like a closeted Santa Claus.
Yeah, it took me way too long to realize that Centicles was just cheesy Greek spelling of Santa Claus. Took me a couple scenes to latch onto this.
But Xena is like, well, this sucks. This is a bad state of affairs that this town is in. I'm going to go beat up that king. And Gabrielle is like, well, no, Xena, that wouldn't be, sporting. You need to try a lighter hand. And so they decide what they're going to do is try to win over and change the mind of the king by impersonating the three fates, which essentially means, like Real Ghostbusters, they're going to be the Christmas ghosts. They're going to go through the motions of this process to effect a change. But I actually really liked this angle that they're going to be the fates. Dan, I know you're a big fan of Disney's Hercules, where we saw the three fates in there, because the fates are tied to the lifespan. And the way it's framed here, I actually looked up a little bit about the fates, because outside of Disney's Hercules, I didn't know too much about them. But the first is named Clotho, who spins the life threads. Lachesis, the measurer, measures out how much string each person has. And then Atropos, the inevitable, is the one who cuts the thread. And so here in Xena Christmas Carol, we've got that Clotho is past, Lachesis is present, and Atropos is future, which works perfectly because, it's the whole Grim Reaper thing. That's the death one.
I love how in Hercules, Hades flirts with them by calling them a fate worse than death.
And in talking to Silvis, which is this wicked king, the Scrooge stand-in, they find out that the reason that he hates the solstice so much is that he lost his wife on the solstice. And the wife's name was Analia. Analia, that's quite a name. It's spelled Analia.
Analia, yeah. I didn't even think about that. I just heard it, Analia, and I didn't place that if you were to write it out. Analia.
In the past tableau that they stage, Xena introduces herself as this fate, Clotho of the past, while Gabrielle poses as the ghost of the wife. But Silvis is like, my wife didn't die. I never said that she died.
This was pretty funny to me.
Apparently she just walked out on him.
It's like, oh, damn, our research was wrong. It's like, you gotta have the Oppo research. They didn't have it ready.
Yeah, they gotta course correct. And so they're like, wait, pump the brakes. We gotta kind of, reassess. So then the next thing is, there's a subplot where Gabrielle is with Centicles, and they're talking about why doesn't he give out the toys? You should really be brave and give out the toys. And Centicles says, well, they'll arrest me and they'll throw me in prison, and I hate tight spaces. Which, of course, makes him claustrophobic, even though they never say that.
Oh.
I wish they had said that. Although maybe they can't because they're not calling him Santa Claus, they're calling him Centicles.
Right.
But he doesn't
I
want to
don't
go
know.
in tight spaces. He's afraid of being confined. Xena puts on her present getup, and she takes Sylvis in disguise to the orphanage, basically showing, look at what your conditions have forced the people to do, but there's still, even without packages, boxes, and bags, they've got the Christmas spirit, and look, they're even welcoming you warmly.
A couple things here. One, there's this plot kind of with Gabrielle where she gets this donkey, and they keep showing and talking about the donkey. I was like, what's the deal with the donkey? What's so great about the donkey? I don't care about the donkey. But the donkey does get payoff. But just know that there's this donkey floating around here. And also, I kind of like that the second half of this, they kind of like inadvertently invent Christmas and various aspects of it as it's going along.
Yeah, it's just
pretty great.
Every, Christmas tradition, they're creating it somehow. More like Back to the Future style stuff, like inventing the skateboard.
Right. And like, oh, wait, we'll have the toy maker dress up with a big white beard and stuff. Yeah.
And yeah, like Gabrielle has to smuggle Santa into the orphanage, and he has to go down the chimney. And he's like, it's a tight space. And she's like, if you live a limited life, you're already in a tight space.
Someone wrote that line on a deadline, I think.
But he makes it through, and he's like, I can do anything. I'll do this every year. And yes, I'm really glad that you brought up about the donkey, because that's going to be important. I did just the tiniest bit of research. The donkey was introduced this episode. So
Okay.
they got the donkey this episode. This was not set up ahead of time. I kind of wish they'd had it since the start. But there is a battle in the middle here, because there's always got to be an action scene in this show where they like fight the guards of the king, and they're battling. Xena's up in the air kicking people, throwing the sword frisbee. And during the fight, Gabrielle and Centicles are wielding Santa's toys as weapons. I was wondering, Dan, did you have other examples of media where there's a climactic battle scene and they fight using Santa toys?
I can't say that I do. I'm sure that you do, but I did like how I just thought it was funny, this image of it. Like, you're in this fantasy show known for its like kung fu action, and now we're taking Christmas toys and like launching them and using them as projectiles and turning them into weapons. But what are your specific examples?
Yeah, so two very similar scenes that I thought of were in the Disney Babes in Toyland from 1960, and especially Santa Claus Conquers the Martians in 1964. Like, beat for beat had this, that they're whacking the evil Martian with like Nerf tomahawks and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Very silly, but seasonal. The final ghost to visit Sylvis, the final fate, is this robed figure. But the robed figure is Milana, or Melania. Except she's not really Melania, she's Analia. And she confronts Sylvis, like, she doesn't undo the hood until he's like, no, I'll change my ways. I'm sorry, I'll reform. Although I don't know that was really earned yet. We didn't quite have the pivot moment that we sometimes get.
Right, it's just kind of assuming like, it's Scrooge. We know what's happening here.
Yeah. We got to go through the motions. We've done this story countless times, got to keep going through the motions. And she is charmed by his change, and they wind up reconnecting because, again, this is his secret wife, who I guess has just been living in the town all this time for 30 years, caring for orphans under a different name. So, as in, any of these wandering Ronin type shows, the heroes have fixed things in the town, like Yojimbo, and they're going to head off now to another adventure. Heading out of the town, waving goodbye, everybody's happy in the town. And then, on the outskirts of the town, they come across 3 travelers.
Here it is, the twist ending of the century.
And Xena meets Jesus. It's Mary and Joseph, and they're carrying a baby who I guess has already been born. And they're like, oh man, we're really tired. We've had to travel a long way. It would be a lot easier if we had some kind of means of conveyance. And Gabrielle says, well, here, have this donkey.
That's how Jesus got his donkey, was from Xena the Warrior Princess. Who knew, Brian? I missed that one. Gavin's got to tell us which gospel that one's from.
And Jesus did many other things.
That's right. Whenever I ask him that one, he always refers to that line. Many other incredible things which are not written about here. He got his donkey from Xena the Warrior Princess.
And Mary's like, God bless you, Gabrielle. I was not expecting that.
No, this is great.
I'll tell you, as I was watching this, I actually went in knowing that we were going to get the explanation for Santa Claus. But all the times that they avoid saying Christmas and say solstice instead, I was thinking, okay, well, this is like trying to be totally secular, totally like divorced from any contemporary religion.
Right.
And I was like, well, no way are they going to say, and I guess they never do say, but here it is. Here's Jesus. Every mythology is valid here in this, nebulous dream time that Zelda, keep thinking Zelda. Xena Warrior Princess is set in. It was fun. It was a lot of twists and turns. And like Dan said, we're just going further and further down the iceberg. It's like, we're reaching new depths, Dan. There's whole other veins of this corpus unexplored.
We're drifting further and further from reality.
And so, we come then to our final selection of the evening. Furthest ever removed from Christmas. This is the Roseanne episode from 1992, Halloween 4. So what did you know about Roseanne before this week, Dan?
So I might have seen bits of it here and there. It was not a sitcom in our rotation, and it's one I've never gone back and caught up on. I do know it to be generally pretty well regarded and kind of important. It kind of made the sitcom in general a little bit less cosmopolitan and a little bit more kind of like blue collar suburbs exurbs, and the heroes more ordinary people. But just from what I know, a pretty solid and well regarded and long running sitcom. And of course, John Goodman, who went on to be a tremendous film actor, was one of the stars.
Right. So, like you, I'm a little bit younger than Dan. I did not really watch any of this when it was on the first time around. I was aware that it existed, and I knew that it ran for a long time. When I was like in high school, it was on Nick at Night in reruns, and I watched a little of it at that point. And mostly it would be that I would like turn to the channel and I would see an episode starting up and I would click to some other channel. But even just that little exposure, I saw that in like the opening credits from season to season, they would do a thing where it would show that the family had aged. Like in season 5, it would show the opening from 10 seconds of the opening from season 1, and then it would dissolve into how they looked in season 3, and then it would dissolve into how they looked in season 5.
Oh, that's cool.
This was on for 10 seasons in its original run, 231 episodes from 1988 to 1997. And then, as you probably know, if you're the kind of person who still watches network television, which is not everybody, but the old timers for sure. It's kind of still on because they brought it back in 2018. Roseanne, being that controversial Heartland of America blue-collar figure that she is, alienated the media elites and was cast out almost straight away. And the show became The Conners, which airs to this day. 2018, currently ongoing, 106 episodes so far.
So a couple of things here, Brian. One is I want to correct on one number.
Please do.
Because I think this is kind of interesting. So I think it only ran for 9 seasons in its original run. And then the revival started as marketed and designed as the 10th season. And then when they got rid of Roseanne, they pivoted it into a new show. What is it called again?
The Conners.
The Conners.
And I'm glad that you clarified that. From what I was reading, I couldn't quite tell. It's kind of like the Jetsons, where there's that long gap, and then suddenly you make another season and act like it's still the same thing. So it can be confusing. I mean, just think about in future generations. Think about 40 years from today, people are going to have trouble keeping track of this stuff.
One more interesting thing about Roseanne that was one reason I kind of always wanted to go catch up on this show. So kind of famously, you know, when you're a long running sitcom about ordinary life, you're going to kind of run out of juice. You know, you got, how many stories can you tell about just being a normal household? Certainly a lot, but you're going to run out of steam. So in the 8th season out of 9 of the original run, it started to get really loopy. They added in all sorts of crazy twists to it, if I'm not mistaken. I could be off by these seasons. I think 8 is the crazy one. And then in the 9th season, they reveal that it was like a book or something like that. Like it was season 8 was the previous, was the completely crazy shenanigans because it wasn't happening in real life. It was happening in this book that Roseanne was writing that was like fiction about the characters in her life for things that could really happen. Either that or it was season 9 and it was revealed in the finale that it was a book or something weird like that. And there was like, I need to go read the whole story because there was like casting drama, like John Goodman was either in and out or he was written off or something like that. But this whole idea that it like plays with reality and like gets really bizarre late in the run, I just found very interesting.
That's wild. Yeah, I think at one point she won the lottery. So actually they're not working class anymore for a little bit. And then, yeah you had to like go back and forth, retcon things.
Right. And then they found a way to address it when it was continued as well, too, in the 2010s. But the reason that I kind of was aware of this is because I followed very closely the show Community when it was on air. I was a big fan, particularly of the first couple seasons. But they fired the show's creator after the 3rd season, Dan Harmon. They brought in someone else. And then in a very unusual move, they brought him back for a 5th season and then later a 6th season. And so after he was brought back for a 5th season, there was some speculation that he would basically write out season 4 as a gas leak or something like that, like people just hallucinating. And he never actually did that. He kind of intentionally didn't want to like throw the people who had kind of worked hard on it under the bus. But he made a couple of allusions to it throughout the rest of the run. But some people still call season 4 the gas leak season, just because it wasn't the only one not run by Dan Harmon.
And I also, just in my channel flipping experience, gathered that Halloween was a big deal on Roseanne. That they would always swing for the fences in terms of production value in the Halloween episodes. And actually, so it looks like Roseanne was never part of the TGIF lineup, but it was on ABC, which had TGIF. And I kind of see it as part of that same family a little bit as the Miller Boyette stuff, like Full House and Perfect Strangers and Family Matters and Step by Step. So it's kind of its own thing, but some of the same feeling is there.
Yeah,
It's maybe not quite as schmaltzy as though.
Exactly. Yeah.
But some of those also would go big with the Halloween episodes. Like, I think Family Matters especially. I remember Halloween episodes.
Okay.
But here in Roseanne, it's their 4th Halloween episode. It was an episode in the 5th season of the show. And Roseanne is not feeling it. She feels like this is just what's expected. Like she's just going through the motions, carrying on a tradition that has maybe lost its spark. And can she find that energy again in time? I guess the way that it's framed is her whole thing is that on Halloween she likes to play pranks on people. And this is part of her essence. It's who she is. So at the opening, her husband Dan and her sister, what is her name? Lori? Why am I blanking? Jackie. She has a sister named Jackie.
Well, played by Laurie Metcalf.
Right, okay, the actress's name is Lori, and she plays Jackie. And that was another thing we got to experience this week, was like if we didn't really know the show, we kind of had to gather context clues from what was around us.
It's kind of a lost art in the streaming era where you always have access to everything. Of every episode needs to give you just enough context clues that you could have never seen the show before and would understand enough about the dynamics to know what's going on.
Dan and Jackie are like playing gory pranks to try to jumpstart Roseanne's Halloween spirit.
Right, because the thing about her Halloween spirit is not just that she loved Halloween and all this stuff, but like specifically she loves tormenting other people with cruel pranks on Halloween. And I think you can see where this is leading, that this is like another anti-Christmas Carol here.
But it's like John Goodman pretends that he gets his arm ripped off in the garbage disposal and there's blood spraying everywhere. And they're going, ah! Ah! And Roseanne is unmoved. And the adults head off to go to like a party at a Elks Lodge style place, a fraternal order lodge. The kids go out to their Halloween parties or trick-or-treating or wherever they're going to go. You know, this is still like the tail end of the 80s era when kids could go off on their own places.
And I also think more than that, well, in addition to all that, it was a different era for Halloween too, because I feel like nowadays Halloween, the theme has shifted a little bit. I think in like the 70s, 80s, early 90s, it was much more about like kids causing havoc. Going around, you mess with people, you knock down mailboxes and you leave dog poop on porches and you light things on fire and you cause mischief. But like nowadays, I don't hear that referenced as like a major Halloween theme. Now it's horror movies and getting candy and doing the most elaborate dress up that you can do. Like the prankster spirit of Halloween isn't quite what it used to be.
Right.
And so in some ways, this whole thing is like a meta reflection on shifting Halloween.
Yeah, we talked about that a bit actually in our The Houses October Built episode, that they went to a town that advertises itself as having invented trick-or-treating, that there was kind of like a civic movement to encourage that, oh, this is what you do on Halloween. You actually don't throw eggs. But Roseanne says she's not going to go. Everybody goes off to celebrate. Roseanne is going to stay home. The kids, well, and the adults too, everybody just has insane Halloween costumes. Because, of course, these aren't real people. These are employees at a TV studio, a movie studio. These are Hollywood actors, and they just have a whole warehouse full of costumes. I was always jealous of this. Even at like 5 years old, I was like, that's not real. You couldn't just... that's what breaks my immersion, is nobody has a costume budget like that.
A couple of them get pretty elaborate and gnarly.
Mm-hmm. But I remember the one that really shaped my life is that on Family Matters, Steve Urkel had a suit of armor, and it was just like he just went out and got one. And it's like, well, you couldn't really do that. It's like, it's not that easy. It's not that cost effective to get a suit of armor.
Right, like, isn't one of the themes of Roseanne that they never have enough money? And yet, like, the costumes that they're having here are like, God, several $100s, some of them gotta be.
But I set a goal for myself, Dan, back in the day, that one day I would have a real metal suit of armor.
You would own a suit. You would be Urkel. You would achieve Urkeldom.
That's correct. And I do have the suit of armor now.
Huzzah.
Yes. What I don't have is Urkel's car. He drove a BMW Isetta from 1959, and they're actually pretty expensive. But it is like the goofiest looking car you could imagine. Someday, Dan. Isetta, that's the next thing.
So, someday you'll drive an Isetta? Yeah, I'm looking these up. They look like a smushed VW Bug driving in reverse or something.
Yeah, it's like a VW Bug with 3 tires instead of 4.
Oh,
it's
got 3 tires. Oh my
It's
gosh.
like a tricycle VW Bug.
Dingus Bug, yeah.
And you climb in by opening the front of the car. The front of the car is the door. And probably if you were in a car accident in it, you would not survive.
True of many old cars.
But while Roseanne is staying home in her funk, of course, she gets visited by 3 spirits. And these, I mean, ghosts, Halloween is the time of year you expect ghosts. There's that Andrew Williams, right? The singer, Christmas singer, sings Most Wonderful Time of the Year.
Mm-hmm. Oh, Andy Williams, yeah.
Andy Williams. I called him Andrew Williams. I knew I was getting close. And in that song, he says, "There'll be scary ghost stories and tales of the glories of Christmases long, long ago." I feel like you don't really have scary ghost stories, but he must be referring to A Christmas Carol. That's like literally the only one. But you get lots of scary ghost stories in Halloween, so it's kind of fitting, is my point.
I'm just now connecting that the Andy Williams scene from The Simpsons is the same Andy Williams probably that sang The Most Wonderful Time of the Year. I mean, it's got to be, right?
Right, the one that when they visit Branson, Missouri, he's performing there.
One of my favorite, I don't think it's Branson. Is it Branson, Missouri? Oh, yeah. They call it, they have like some snide remark about it, but one of my favorite, like they just throw in a detail about a character the way that The Simpsons could do. And like that Nelson Muntz absolutely loves. His heart melts at Andy Williams, and they go to an Andy Williams concert. I didn't think he was going to play Moon River, but then bam, second encore. This is one of my favorites.
I like that there's the sun sphere in that. We're parked under the sun sphere, and that's a real thing. Like, that's a real landmark you could go and visit. Live a little of The Simpsons. But these ghosts, the first one is under a bedsheet, like a classic Charlie Brown Halloween costume. But under the sheet, there's just a hovering human heart. And this past ghost shows scenes of Roseanne growing up. And I guess she's been pulling these terrifying pranks since birth.
Right, all the way back to the cradle. Even Scrooge flashbacks don't go to the cradle.
Like, as an infant, she's pretending to asphyxiate and, like, panicking the mother. And a little later, she's scaring her sister by pretending to get the razor blade in the apple. Which, I think we talked about razor blades and apples maybe back when we did Trick or Treat. But that's kind of like a classic urban legend, even though there's never been a documented case where that happened.
Or like it did one time, but it was just a dad or something like that.
Yeah, like if you go to the Wikipedia page, that's exactly right. That, like, if it has happened, it was like a dad or a stepfather or an uncle poisoned their kid.
Right.
And when my brother covered this on his radio show, he was like, and it's kind of surprising because it's a great plan. Perfect crime. No one would know. If you if all the candy was poisoned and you dispersed it over in like a wide enough area, they'd never find you. That was his take. So maybe don't take any candy from my brother.
Yeah, I was going to say, moral of the story, I'm skipping the Terrell house.
He's still working on it, working on the formula, working on the strategy. He's not there yet. There's another tableau where it's a high school dance, Halloween dance, I guess, or just a party where they are in high school. And there was some mention early on when Dan was trying to pump up Roseanne where he's like, come on, this is our special day. And it turns out, I guess, this is where we learned that they met on Halloween. And Roseanne pranked the girl who had come with Dan, and like she gets disgusted and storms off, and then they wind up dancing together.
By the way, did you see who young Dan was dressed as for Halloween?
Yeah, he was a caveman, so probably a nod to John Goodman being Fred Flintstone. Although, let's look up when that movie was, because I think that was like 1994.
Yeah, so it's right around the same time. Did you have when this episode came out? Was this like a year or two before?
Yeah, this was 1992, so maybe it was in the works.
Possibly, but it's not directly Fred Flintstone, so it's certainly possible it was not an intentional homage. Like, that's just a costume you could choose. But if I had to guess, I would say it probably was a tip of the hat to that.
Yeah. I thought the guy they cast as young John Goodman was good. It's like I could see him becoming John Goodman.
Yeah, I thought all the young cast was pretty good. It was fun. Well, I guess the only ones we recognize are Dan and Roseanne, but I thought they were both good.
Mm-hmm.
And what is she? She's Ginger from Ginger if Ginger never got brought to the island or something?
No, it was like Ginger if she never got off the island.
Oh, okay.
Or they do say the phrasing is if they never found the island. So I wonder if that meant if the castaways never found the island, or if I thought it was like if they were never rescued from the island. But I guess that's open to interpretation. But
yeah, I don't know.
The reason it's important is that like she has this high concept costume and nobody gets it except Dan immediately gets it.
Yeah.
It's like there's a Friends Halloween episode where Ross he's like a thing, like a brown bulbous body, and he has antenna on his head. And they're like, what are you supposed to be? And he says, oh, I'm Spudnik. So he's like a potato satellite. And nobody understands, except then this woman walks in and she's like, oh, Spudnik. And Chandler, somebody is like, marry her.
What it had me thinking of is the show How I Met Your Mother. That show gets a little bit of a bad rap these days because most people hated the ending. That show was like ingeniously clever at its best, like so well written, and like subverted the format in some cases even of what a sitcom could do. And it was also just very, very funny, and occasionally even touching. It was like thoughtful and touching. But anyways, from that kind of early glory era, one episode was Ted, like when he was in his young 20s or late teens, he went as a hanging Chad to a Halloween party and had a great night with a young woman who he never saw again. And so every Halloween he dresses as a hanging Chad, which is of course a reference to the 2000 election. It's like the kind of thing that would be relevant for exactly one Halloween. And not even then, because like that was an election in November, and by the following October, nobody would have even been thinking about it. But now every year it's like, you know, we're in the 2010s and he's still dressing as the hanging Chad.
Wow, that's like Miss Havisham from Great Expectations or something. Frozen in the moment, you never move on from your wedding day.
Right, in the hopes that he'll find this long lost connection that She will recognize him as the hanging Chad someday.
Yeah, I've not seen much of that show. Maybe I gotta check it out. Oh, and I didn't talk about the costumes. I went off on that whole Urkel riff. But, like, when the kids went out to their Halloween party, or wherever they were going, Mischief, Becky is Tippi Hedren from The Birds, and she's, like, in the process of being eaten by birds. DJ, the son, is Hannibal Lecter, and he's, like, strapped to the dolly. I liked the discussion of the logistics of how he's going to get around all night. They're like, now remember to wheel your brother around, and when you're in the car, keep him face up.
Yeah, I was like, these are cool costumes even nowadays.
Yeah.
If I saw that, I'd be like, oh, that's cool. It's not just like 90s TV cool. It's actually cool.
And so the present spirit, who is a big piece of candy corn, takes Roseanne over to this party where the adults are at this Elks Lodge. And they're kind of all talking about her behind her back, like the Nephew Fred party that you often see in Christmas Carol.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, playing games where it's all kind of a setup to have them talk about her when she's not there.
Right. Ah, she's such a downer.
But the costume that John Goodman is in, that I guess Roseanne would have been a part of if she had gone, he is Marie Antoinette's body, and the other person in the costume, who in this case is Jackie subbing in, is Marie Antoinette's head.
This is the one that would cost like $1,000 to make, Brian. And you'd have to have someone commit to being the head, too.
Right. And then Jackie's like fighting with her husband, so the head is like distracted and fighting with this other person. The future ghost is like a jack-o'-lantern man. If you have kept up with recent Halloween developments, he's basically Lewis from Target. Are you familiar with this, Dan?
No, what's that?
So,
like Target, like the store?
Yes, like Target, like the store. Last year at Halloween, one of their decorations, because, listeners, you may know, I get big Halloween decorations every year, which has really exploded. The Halloween decoration scene has blown up since 2017. You've probably heard about the 12-foot Home Depot skeleton that they introduced in 2020. But these stores, they don't just sell the same Halloween decorations every year. It's new things every year because they always want you to buy more. And it encourages that if you know it's all going to be gone next year, better buy it this year while it's here.
Exactly. It's like the seasonal thing now. It's like, oh, limited edition.
It's like the Disney Vault. And then, you know, scalpers know that this is how it works. And then next year they're going to be selling whatever was new and exclusive the previous year. Next year they're going to be selling it for like $500 because the prices have gotten insane too.
Do you have any one that got away?
The T-Rex. Home Depot had a T-Rex skeleton back in 2017. I got the horse that year, the life-size horse, which is pretty good. But the T-Rex has never come back. So that's the one for me.
Gotcha.
Anyway, all that said, what actually was my point? Oh, that last year, one of the things that Target introduced that blew up was they had a tall Grim Reaper style guy who had a pumpkin head. And one of the things that he says when you step on his foot or whatever sets him off, he says, "You might think my name's Jack, but it's not. My name's Lewis." And like it was a meme on TikTok to post the "My name is Lewis." And now this year, Lewis was everywhere. You go to Target, he's like their guy. Their Halloween guy is Lewis.
How do you feel about this?
Not an entirely... You know what it is? It's Elf on the Shelf, Dan. Target's always got to have their own little original character who embodies the holiday, and if you don't get him, you're not really doing it right.
Oh, was Elf on the Shelf a Target thing?
I think so. Let's look it up. It was some chain store invented Elf on the Shelf.
But then that got turned into like a whole franchise.
Exactly.
My sister watched the movie a lot growing up, and it's her nostalgia favorite.
Okay, Target not found. So what is the store that sells the elves on the shelves? I'm going to dig into that, and I can tell you officially next time. There's a reason for you to tune back in. But, yeah, I don't know if I'm totally on board with Lewis, but as we can see, the jack-o'-lantern-headed cloaked dude, not entirely a new idea. By the way, the Halloween ghost in the first season of Real Ghostbusters was a cloaked figure who had a jack-o'-lantern for a head. You see him in the containment unit.
Lots of Lewis action.
Yeah.
For a Christmas episode.
But what this proto-Lewis tells Roseanne is that in the future, if she doesn't change her ways, she's going to become a normie. She's going to become a typical sitcom wife, like June Cleaver, where she's just going to be this 1950s domestic goddess housewife, not rough around the edges at all, coiffed Stepford wife who Dan is going to step out on because she's too boring.
Not the first time, by the way, that you've been describing the John Goodman character, and I've been like, wait, why is Brian saying that I would do these things?
Oh yes, his name is Dan Connor.
Right, the John Goodman guy. But yes, this is very funny to me, Brian. Like, every one of these had some, like, unhinged twist to it. And this one, it's that, like, everything is reversed. She needs to learn how to be someone who does cruel pranks again, because she's lost that love, that spirit. And when she sees herself in her miserable future, it's that she's become very kind and very sweet, and much like her own mother, doting on people and telling them not to eat too much candy and stuff like that. And this is great, because it's the reverse of Scrooge, where the horrible future is that she's kind and loving and caring and not an asshole.
And so her mission is clear. She needs to bring the nastiness, the gory pranks back into the world. And she rushes off to the party. And the prank she throws is that she's the Statue of Liberty and she lights up a torch that sets off the sprinklers.
For all of about 5 seconds here, I thought the prank was she was going to burn down the building, because she lights the torch and she holds it up.
That would have been wild.
I was like, are we going to see arson as the funny prank here?
Yeah, I mean, we've got the Substance episode coming out soon, where it comes to this disastrous Carrie climax. That would have been something. She just locks all the doors and burns everybody to death.
Maybe in season 8 or whatever the crazy one is, that's what would happen.
Yeah, so we almost went chronological talking about these selections, but this is the order I watched them in, and I thought we gotta talk Roseanne last, because it's not even Christmas for one. It's a whole other holiday, but the message is, even if you're tired of doing the same thing every year, you gotta keep going, because people rely on you to do that specific thing.
Is that how you're feeling about us, Brian?
Yeah, I think that's how I'm feeling, Dan. What are you thinking? Have you got the spirit? Have you been reinvigorated, digging once again into A Christmas Carol?
So you mean about our Christmas Carol discussion specifically?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say this was a good antidote, because every one of them, like I said, had some weird... had some blast of upheaval to it. And I don't know, I think this was certainly enough to tide me over to next year. I think there's other directions we could go, and I think whatever direction we choose, we need to find some angle in on it. Whether it's a specific discussion format or some theme that allows us to talk about a broader theme or something.
Yeah, got to think carefully, because we do run that risk of getting stale.
Just another.
But there's so many out there. We're never going to run out. So we will think carefully, listeners, but let us know if you thought this was worthwhile. You can sound off on the Discord.
That's right. That's at thegoodsfilmpodcast.com.
But before we wrap it all up, Dan, we got to say, as we always do, is it good?
So Is It Good is our signature section where we each give the movie a rating on our 8-point goodness scale, ranging from very not good, which is a 1 out of 8, to our masterpiece rating, toward a good, which is an 8 out of 8. So I guess we'll go in the order that we discussed them, starting with A Jetson Christmas Carol from 1985. I will go first. I will say that I found this to be a 5, a good. Well, actually, hold on. Before I dive into that, let me just give a proviso. I did not go look at what all my old Christmas Carol ratings were. I go up and down on like how I rate things. Just because in 2021 I gave something a higher rating or a lower rating doesn't necessarily mean I like it more or less than something else that I give it, a comparative rating higher or lower, because it a lot depends on my mood and how, I feel like compared to something that I watched recently, but I kind of came at these and my ratings are all based on the perspective of me personally being someone who has already had to talk about 16 different Christmas carols. So like coming in as a grizzled Christmas Carol veteran, how would I rate these things? So if I'm just a Joe Schmo who's barely watched a Muppet Christmas Carol off the street, what would I have to say? I don't know. I'm not that person. I'm the person who's already reviewed 16 Christmas carols.
Just think, Dan, how history would be different if you had never been led down this path.
Who can say? So on that note, I found A Jetsons Christmas Carol to be good. It doesn't barely even try to actually do the full-on Christmas Carol thing. It like hits the beats like about 15 seconds a piece. Like I said, it's only half of an already 20-minute episode that gets the whole Christmas Carol bit in there. But what I loved was that, first of all, it's just all wrapped in this kind of Jetson future irony thing. Like, I don't know. It's just very interesting tone that makes me want to go watch more Jetsons. But the fact that Scrooge, it built like every beat, Christmas past, Christmas present, Christmas future comes into him and doesn't shake him at all about loving money and being rich. It's only the threat of him getting sued that makes him decide to do something generous so that he won't be held liable. I found that inspired and funny. And so I'm giving this a soft passing grade of a 5 out of 8. What about you, Brian?
Nice. So I originally was going to give this a 4, mainly just because it goes so fast and everything is kind of rote by this point. But I'm seeing it through new eyes after your perspective. And you're right, because this is actually like the perfect way to start off our discussion as part of an existing body of like an ongoing show. You, especially cartoons, especially, sitcoms, you can't change the status quo at the end of an episode. And Christmas Carol is all about a character arc. The whole thing is one character changing, which can't happen in family sitcoms. Everything has to be restored to order at the end. So every ghost is basically saying, don't change. Be who you are. And he's like, all right, the threat here is that things might change, so I need to stay the course. And, maybe give a little so that I don't get, I don't fall victim to the eat the rich mentality. Give just an inch so they don't take a mile. And so what I come down on is I will give it a 5 as well.
Cool. So then next up is the Real Ghostbusters Xmas Marks the Spot, 1986. I'm going to also give this one a good. I found it a subversion in its own way. I like the idea of the Ghostbusters fumbling their way through being the ghosts. The whole thing where they had to pull the ghosts out of the grid was kind of like the B plot. I found less interesting, and it was more the show just doing its own thing. But honestly, it doesn't last that long. And I like that we have a stealth Scrooge in there. So this for me is also kind of scratching an itch of doing it a different way that's still kind of satisfying and feeling like it's of the show, but also like doing spirit slash riffing on A Christmas Carol in a way that shows that they actually appreciated and understood it and thought through it, but are like not being too reverential about it. So that's how I felt about the Real Ghostbusters one, Brian. That's another 5 for me. What about you?
So this one was my favorite. It gets a bit of a bump over the others just because I feel like it was clamoring to exist. Like, somebody had the idea, we got to make a Ghostbusters show. Well, who are some famous ghosts? Well, what would happen if just in a regular work day, they caught the Christmas ghosts and they didn't get to do what they're supposed to do? And so we get this whole Back to the Future alternate plot, or It's a Wonderful Life, where this dark anti-Christmas timeline is created. And I think it's great. And of course you got the Shadow Scrooge, who's also got to learn the lesson. It's really not just about Scrooge, it's also about Bill Murray. And I thought it worked. I liked it. The animation in this show is by a Japanese studio, and so it kind of looks like a cheapo anime. It's got like a Speed Racer vibe. Like anytime you see a wide shot of crowds, they got like weird face expressions. They kind of jerk around in the background.
You see that in early Simpsons too, yeah.
And it looks very Japanese, especially when you get those wide shots. So it's kind of a quirky, like, cultural mishmash at work in Real Ghostbusters. So 6 from me. Very good.
Cool. And then next up we have A Solstice Christmas from Xena Warrior Princess, 1996. I was originally kind of down on this one just because of the weird energy of the first two. And then this just gets weirder and weirder as it goes. They're inventing Santa and Christmas by accident just to like get at this one grumpy mayor or whatever he is. And then they meet Jesus in the closing scene. And I was like, oh my God, they went there. They did because that's the thing about A Christmas Carol is it's not really a Christian story. I mean, it's got some Christian themes to it, but it's more humanistic. And like everything about it is not the spirit of Jesus, but it's like the spirit of you need to be good to people because it makes you sad when other people suffer and you have the ability to prevent that. Like there's maybe a little more to it than that, but that's kind of the gist of it. And then so here we're like, okay, we invented Christmas, even though we couldn't say Christmas because we're this medieval fantasy thing. And then also here's Jesus. We're going to give Jesus his donkey. That's how Jesus got his donkey, was because Xena the Warrior Princess and her lesbian lover gave it to her on the day after Christmas. That's what happened, Brian.
Yeah, remember the reason for the season. Xena Warrior Princess.
So it was maybe going to be like a high 3, low 4, and then it kind of built, and then it was a 4 when they were doing like the Christmas battle scene, and then I'm going to inch it up into 5 by the time we got to the end. I was vibing with it by the time we were done.
Yeah, this one gets a 5 from me too. Just exactly what you said, that it builds over the course of it. And even though I had been tipped off about Santa, I was thinking, no way are Mary and Joseph and Jesus going to come walking down the road, and then there they are. And they wouldn't be the famous world-changing figures they are today were it not for Lucy Lawless stepping in.
Lastly, we have Halloween 4 from 1992. This is the Roseanne episode. We're going to do 5s across the board for me this year, Brian. I'm giving it good as well. I think it is its own. It gives you a flavor of Roseanne. Like I feel like I understand the show Roseanne now that I've seen just this one kind of novelty episode of it. It still feels like its own thing. It's not like it did a more earnest separate thing because it's still got the same flavor of jokes. And then we also get like the fun Halloween production values and crazy costumes. And just kind of like the first one, it's got this sort of antithesis of the spirit. And I think you kind of nailed why they kind of have to do this. They don't want people to actually change. Like the end result needs to be, I'm convinced to be who I always was, you know? And the fact that they did it with making sure Roseanne continues to be an asshole on Halloween was just very charming. And of course, I love it whenever John Goodman's on screen. I think this cast is pretty good. I feel like I would get a kick out of watching more Roseanne too. Maybe that's a testament to it, is it makes me want to go watch more of the show. So I'm going to give this one a 5, Brian.
Good. I think I will too. You've won me over. You know, I'm feeling the spirit of the season. I was going to give it a 4, but it's buoyed by all the costumes. I love the costumes. And like everybody, there's this big crowd at the party and everybody's got the nuts studio costumes. And just the idea that, yeah, we do this every year. It's been done to death, but there's magic in perpetuating it.
Right.
It's like, all right, I'm feeling it. We'll see what happens next year, dedicated listeners, whether we go back to the well yet again, but I'm not ready to declare a moratorium yet.
I think these were, like I've said a couple times now, these are good for people who want Christmas Carol, but want a little different. They don't just want more Christmas Carol. Like, are any of these better than ones I've given similar rating to? I don't know. But they were just right for me in 2024. So goods across the board.
We're becoming, I guess any sort of thing could have connoisseurs who are highly like sophisticated in their palate. But I'm thinking of like weed strains. Like, can you give me something with that special buzz of that Christmas Carol strain that I haven't had yet?
Yeah, it's got to have like some 90s sitcom edge to it, and if you could give it like some of that Halloween punch to it, I think that'd be great.
I just want to mellow. I don't want to be on edge. If it's too much one way, I get paranoid. So, listeners, if this is your vibe, join us again, see what kind of cultivars we dredge up next. But Dan, what is coming next in the Goods episode to come that will not be Christmas Carol? Like, what is next week?
That's right. We'll wake up and it's tomorrow has come. Not Christmas morning here, but if we can get the logistics right, we're actually going to have Nate back on. Now, normally we don't have guests return quite so shortly after their previous appearance, but when I was talking with Nate, I was like, I want to pick your brain on what I know is one of your favorite movies, which is Rear Window by Alfred Hitchcock. And he's like, well, let's just do it right now. Do you guys want to record another episode? I was like, oh, I wish I could, but I got to go make dinner. I don't know if that part made it on there. I might have edited it out, but I was like, well, let's do it soon. And so now we're going to do it. If we can get it all hammered out, we're going to have Nate back on and we will talk Rear Window by Alfred Hitchcock, our first Alfred Hitchcock film. Not Christmassy, but still something I'm looking forward to discussing.
But it's got Jimmy Stewart, so if you go by the Bruce Willis logic, any movie where he appears, Christmas movie.
Zuzu's pedals! Yeah, something like that. So, all right. Looking forward to it, Brian, and thank you once again for this fun selection, and a happy holidays to all listeners out there.
Good bless us, everyone.
Goods bless us. That's good. All right, see you, Brian.
Bye. Have a good night, guys.